Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed, ready to go. Um, Sorry, a few minutes late, just trying to get everything all squared away on my end. Trust you guys had a really good weekend. Yesterday was one of those days that we kind of heard some thunder here in New Hampshire. It's not a normal everyday event, but rain was coming down pretty good yesterday, and rain was really strong. So I'm sure the grass and trees and everything feels pretty good. Starting to look more and more like leaves are on the trees, and pretty soon I'm hoping I'll be able to go outside and do our seize the days from outside. Already mowed my lawn 2 times this season, so we're off to a good start. Trust you guys had an opportunity to continue your readings through the Gospel of Matthew. You know, one of the most catalytic events that a person can have in their spiritual life, and this has been done by numerous people who spend time, interviewing and studying people who are engaged in their walk with the Lord. That Bible reading and prayer are the top two by far. It's like, what do you think the three most telling or sought after ice cream flavors are? The three most the three top ice cream flavors. They would be vanilla and chocolate and strawberry. Now, out of those three, do you think they're kind of evenly matched? What you would discover is that vanilla is twice as much as chocolate. Some people say because it's used in a lot more of different kinds of recipes and desserts, but vanilla has twice as much. And so the reason I'm mentioning that to you today is that when it comes to spiritual disciplines, reading your Bible is like vanilla ice cream. It promises to give you the most opportunity to just increase your faith. So I don't know what your regular Bible reading is, but if you're going along with us in this Gospel of Matthew, that's a really good beginning. Just keep that up. Just every day, just try to sit down before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, some regular part of your day that you could just say, hey, you know what? I'm just going to read a chapter today. There are some great apps that are out there that you could use that will help you to just stay current. They'll even send it to your phone, so you don't even have to go looking for it. And that's a great way to just stay engaged in this work. Well, today is Monday, May the 18th. And so we get an opportunity to sit down together today and study through the scriptures for another week. We have been looking at the miracles of Jesus in a series called Power. And as we do that, we have been discovering some interesting things from the miracles of Jesus. The first thing that I just want to point out is when you look through Matthew's chapter 8 and 9, what you discover is that Matthew is moving on in his description of who Jesus is. We have had the first 4 chapters reminding us again that Jesus is the Messiah that was promised. On the Sermon on the Mount, we saw in Jesus one who speaks with authority, spoke as if he was speaking the words of God himself, right? And so consequently, you can begin to see that people are beginning to come to him, not only because of his teaching, but now we discover more and more also because of his miraculous displays of power. And Matthew chapter 8 turns this corner, and now we're treated to 3 of those miracles: a leper, a centurion servant, and his mother-in-law, all of which pointed out that Jesus is the Messiah that was promised, that Jesus is fulfilling all that the Old Testament described about what the Messiah would look like, what he would do. And so it's really important for Matthew for us to recognize that, because as we do, what he hopes will happen is it will strengthen people's faith, that they will begin to make their decisions to follow after Jesus. And so that is precisely what is happening in our text again today. This week, we're going to take a look at a question that's posed by the disciples themselves when they ask the question, what kind of man is this? They are privileged to witness another one of Jesus's miracles, only this time it's left them, awestruck. And we're going to examine that a little bit today. So I invite you to turn in your Bibles to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8. And what I'd like to do is just have you look at a passage here in the first few verses, Matthew 18. Eventually, we're going to take it all the way down to verse 27. But today, we're just going to look at the first 4 verses here. Let me read them for you. It says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Well, the crowds have formed around Jesus. We saw that after when Jesus was in Peter's home, and after he had healed his Peter's mother-in-law of a fever, it says, when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him. He drove out spirits with a word and healed all the sick. So this idea of Jesus beginning to display more and more of his power in this, ministry of casting out evil spirits, healing sick people. And notice there are 2 different categories. The Bible isn't saying here that all sickness is caused by evil possession. Sickness is caused as a result of the fall, right? The judgment that's on this world, that surely things will have now a span of life, and that will come to an end. You see that in creation. You see that in our bodies, right? There are signs of this brokenness and judgment all around us, and so here, as in many places through the scriptures, the categories are kept distinct, but they are both realities as Matthew begins to display them. But I also want you to see, it says in verse 18, it says, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, this is what he's looking at. Imagine everywhere you go that your reputation now has preceded you. And it's more than just the paparazzi who want to take your picture. Now people are bringing to Jesus all those who are the most impossible of cases. They don't know what to do. They're looking for a miracle. And so they are seeking Jesus out. And everywhere he goes, the crowds just begin to swell. Let them find out where he is laying his head, and they're going to be on it in a moment. So town to town, home to home, you can imagine that constant barrage. Now, remember, Jesus is God, but he's also man, which says that he gets tired, that he finds himself in a situation where he needs rest. I think that's part of the reasons why, when you read through the scriptures and find many places where Jesus will withdraw and to be alone, because it's a matter of being recentered. Prayer does that, doesn't it? Our communion with our Father, when, as Jesus says, when it's done in secret, not to be seen of men, is something that is supposed to revitalize the spirit, keep us focused on what it is that we are to be pursuing. And so here, evening comes, all these people are around Jesus. No doubt he's weary, he's tired. He sees the crowds around him. He heals all the sick, and then he gives orders to cross to the other side of the lake. The lake is the Sea of Galilee. The lake is about 13 miles long and at its widest point, it's about 8 miles wide. That's a pretty substantial body of water. And so they're getting ready to cross, and suddenly we're introduced to a teacher of the law. The one when it says the teacher of the law, right? The law is a reference to the Old Testament, the books of Moses, what the Jews would have called Torah. It is comprised of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And there is the story of the beginnings of the world, its fall, the consequent judgments that come, the emancipation of Israel from the land of Pharaoh, right? The Egyptians. A great story that we're going to take a look at a little bit later this week in the Passover and all that entailed, and how that became such a pivotal point in the story, in Israel's story. Generation after generation, they would pass it down, much like we do in our day of the birth of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus. Holidays that now have found their way into our songs, right? Into our rituals, Sunday after Sunday, where people are recognizing that this Jesus has come into the world to save the world from sin. So this teacher of the law is all about the Old Testament. And so he comes and he calls Jesus a teacher. You know what's interesting? When you look at this in the scriptures, and you see this description being given of Jesus, right? This is in Matthew 8. Matthew 8, 19, where you begin to see they call teachers. Most of the time, that's a title that's given by those who do not fully believe in Jesus. In fact, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law will say in Matthew 12, "Teacher, we want to see a miraculous sign from you," right? Or again, in chapter 19 of Matthew, the rich young man comes up to Jesus and says, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" Right? Or disciples who were called the Herodians, right? They come to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, we know you're a man of integrity, that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are." Like, see, these are all niceties. They're all accurate in the sense that Jesus is a teacher, but they're inadequate in describing who Jesus is. Jesus has come to be more than just a teacher and more than just a prophet. I mean, think about this. People will say, "Well, I think Jesus was a great teacher." Well, why do they say that? Because they're trying to give Jesus, I think one of the reasons is they're trying to give Jesus room to being, this respectable teacher who has good things to say. But when you examine the things that Jesus says, he's calling us to repentance. Jesus is teaching us about the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is teaching us about who he is and the ways of God. And so if he's a good teacher, maybe we're not really good students, because Jesus is saying a lot more than people are embracing. And he's more than a teacher. He claims to be the Son of God. I remember that famous line, and maybe you do too, from C.S. Lewis. He says, when you consider the claims of Jesus, he's either, a liar or a lunatic, or he's Lord. And so this teacher of the law comes to Jesus with a proper title: "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." I'm always amazed at how when Jesus answers questions, sometimes Jesus answers these questions in a very roundabout kind of way. You notice he doesn't go right after this teacher of the law. Instead, he comes around it. And so what you have to deduce from Jesus's answer is that it is also speaking into the life of this teacher of the law that came to Jesus. So Jesus's answer is being applied to this guy's request. Lord, I will, or his statement, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus is about to get on the boat. He wants to be a part of this entourage. And notice how Jesus answers him. He says, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. You notice that the teacher of the law addressed Jesus as a teacher. Jesus addresses himself as the Son of Man. We're going to take a look at that tomorrow. It's a title that genders a lot of discussion in theological circles, and many attribute this title to the book of Daniel, chapter 7. And we'll get into that a little bit more about what that Son of Man really is all about. The Son of Man really is highlighting his divinity. And we'll see that as we continue on in our study. But back to Jesus's response. He says, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. What do you think Jesus is getting at when he responds to this teacher of the law this way? As a teacher of the law, they were respected in their society, right? If you're thinking about this this tiered system, the teachers of the law were up on the top, right? Now Jesus is telling him, if you follow me, I don't really have any material things to give you. He says, foxes have holes, birds have nests. I don't even have a place to lay my head. So if you come after me, it's not going to be because of any personal aggrandizement. It's not a career move. And all of a sudden now you begin to realize maybe what really Jesus is saying to this teacher of the law is that if you think following me is going to advance your career, if you think being a part of my band of disciples somehow is going to increase your status, he says it's quite the opposite. In fact, this is hardship. I think maybe the teacher of the law may have been impressed by Jesus's teaching, may have been impressed by the miraculous, and he wanted a part of that, but he wasn't quite willing to count the cost for that. You know, when we get to chapter 16 in Matthew, that is a very pivotal point in the book of Matthew. You'll see this expression. It appears two times in the Bible. Once in chapter 4, where it says, from this time on, and it begins to show that there is a pivot now in what Matthew is writing about. Jesus, he had been writing about Jesus in his early years, and now he's making a pivot to speak about Jesus in his Galilean ministry. And when he makes that pivot, he says, from this time on. Well, in Matthew chapter 16, that phrase comes up again, and it begins to show that Jesus is now heading to Jerusalem. And the language that Jesus begins to share and stories that he shares has everything to do with his crucifixion. He begins to tell them that he is going to be, betrayed and crucified, but on the third day he will rise from the dead. See, that's language that Jesus begins to be very clear about after a period of this ministry. There's a hint of that in this text, saying, look, following me is going to require great cost on your behalf. And so this disciple is sitting there going, I'm not so sure about that. I kidded in my sermon on Sunday that there's a poem out there where it's called Footprints in the Sand, right? And it's saying at one time in my life, there were two sets of footprints, and then sometimes I'd look and I'd only see one. And the assumption by the writer of the poem was saying, like, Lord, when I look back, the times that there were just this one set of footprints is at the darkest times of my life. Why did you leave me when I needed you the most. And God says, when you look back and saw only one set of footprints, it's because that's when I carried you. And that has found great traction, right, for many people. But in this case, they're by the shore. They're ready to get on a boat. And I think if you look down on the ground, you'd see another single set of footprints, but it would be this guy walking in the opposite direction, because there's no mention whatsoever that this guy ever made it on the boat. So he wasn't really satisfied with Jesus's answer. And Jesus's answer is basically, there is a cost to following after me. And you have to be willing to pay that cost. But notice here in verse 21, it says, another disciple comes to him and said, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. Well, some look at this term and they think this may be an expression that is indicating that the father may be really sick, you know, and they're waiting for him to pass. Or some think that as part of this culture, they would bury the dead within a 24-hour period. But then at a later time in the future, they would dig up these corpses and place them in family tombs so that they can be with their generation of family members. You see that, for instance, in the Old Testament when they dug up the bones of Joseph, right, and put Joseph in another tomb, all of which would have required time. And Jesus says the time is now. For Jesus, every moment was critical. As the crowds were beginning to increase, so is the disdain of all of the religious leaders. That's one of the things that you're going to begin to find as we look on in this gospel, is that the heat is going to start to be turned up. In the beginning, everyone is enamored by what Jesus says and what he does. But more and more, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, the scribes, Sadducees, right, the religious leadership of the day, they are going to take issue with Jesus in a very serious way. They'll move from laughter to out and out, derision. They are going to want to silence Jesus's voice, even if it means, having him killed. And so that kind of tension is mounting, and you're going to see that more and more as we go through the Gospel of Matthew. But at this point, people are coming and flocking to Jesus because he's the miracle worker. He is this great teacher, and so he's bringing all these crowds. But Jesus understands that his time is short. Every moment is counting. His ministry will be for a period of time, and so if people wanted to be a part of that ministry now, they needed to make a decision in this moment, not to postpone that decision. And that's why when Jesus rebukes him, he says, "Follow me. Let the dead bury their own dead." It comes across as a harsh rebuke, but Jesus is saying, no, that the time for you to make a decision is now. I'm getting in the boat. If you want to be a part of me, then you got to be. Then you have to come along. Now, here's a point that isn't directly made, but it's I think it's still in the scriptures here, right? We had just finished reading in verse 17 of Matthew, not 17, like 14, that Jesus is in Peter's house, and Jesus and Peter's mother-in-law is sick, which is indicating that Peter is with his family, right? If you were to go to 1 Corinthians and in chapter 9 and verse 5, there's a passage there that Paul is saying that as an apostle, he has rights, and he should have a right to take along a believing wife just the way Peter does. So when you read that in 1 Corinthians 9, you realize then that Peter is not just taking care of his mother-in-law, but Peter also has a wife. Now, why am I telling you this? Because when God asked Peter to drop his nets and follow after him, it didn't mean that Peter left his family, left his responsibilities, that he was no longer to care for his family. Much of the ministry that was taking place with Jesus was around this Galilean region. And many times, I'm sure, Peter wound up going back home and being with his family. So I don't think that Jesus is being overly harsh with this gentleman when he says, follow me, let the dead bury the dead, as if he's never going to see them again. Follow me, turn your back on everybody else. What he is saying is that the moment is now. You want to follow after me, it has to be now. And yet, if they really understood, they really were being drawn to Jesus, like Peter and his brother Andrew, like James and John, Matthew, who's writing this gospel, and others. Not to mention the other crowds that were following him faithfully, like many of those women that we read, who, by the way, were the only ones that really stood with Jesus right up until the very end. What you see in these passages, I think, is that all of these miracles, all of this teaching, is not just to be entertainment. It's to place us in a position where we are going to make a decision on whether or not we're going to follow Jesus. That is a significant decision that we make in this life, because Jesus is saying that there is a life to come. And to enjoy that life, we need to come through him. Throughout the scriptures, we're finding that Jesus is being presented now as the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. That is really harsh. That is really straightforward. But there's no getting around it. Didn't Jesus say that on the Sermon on the Mount when he said, broad is the way and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many there be that find it. But narrow is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life. Jesus is this gate. Jesus is the narrow way. We find him, we find life. We underestimate what we think life is when it's always defined by us. Jesus has something much, much more than you and I could ever think or imagine. So, my friends, 4 verses that just start off by reminding us again, all these miracles should be pushing us to a place where we start to exhibit the faith like we've seen here already of the leper, of the centurion, who, despite their illness, despite the social prejudices that they were facing, they still reached out because they believed that Jesus was able to do exceeding abundant. And right now we have these 2 reluctant disciples. One overeager, I'll go with you wherever you go. The undereager, I can't go right now. No, Jesus wants us to make decisions. Maybe that's a time for you to do today. To just settle in your heart, I am going to follow after Jesus. And what a way to seize the day. My friends, we'll continue with these stories. I trust that you've been challenged in the reading of these, and look forward to tomorrow. It is always a pleasure to be a part of this community. I'm glad that you and I get a chance to share these stories together. Remember to pass them along. It's always a great way to engage other people in the study of the scriptures, and really that they might see Jesus in these passages. So, my friends, God bless you. Looking forward to tomorrow, Lord willing. We'll continue our studies together. God bless.